Today, more girls are just as involved than ever before, and they are disproportionately girls of color. We know that school discipline policies as well as school climate contribute considerably to this growing pipeline. For a myriad of reasons, too often, school policies that appear well-intentioned and neutral on their face have a disparate impact on girls of color. In July, we helped the National Black Women's Justice Institute conduct focus groups with more than 100 girls of color, as well as focus groups for parents, and one with school personnel from BPS, Boston Area Charter, and Catholic schools. Project Focus, GOC, aims to empower girls of color as policy stakeholders and school culture reformers. That's why in September, we held a listening-only hearing for girls of color and their parents. Tonight, we are listening only to school leaders and personnel. I personally am very grateful that you are taking the time to be a part of this discussion and taking the time to reflect on your policies and sharing your best practices with us. I really do consider us all partners in this work. I'm personally excited to have BPS and charter schools in the room working together, committed to working together to improve not just the academic outcomes for our girls of color, but also their health and well-being. I would like to recognize my good friend and fellow at-large colleague, Vice Chair of the Committee on Education, Councilor Sabi George, for a few opening remarks.
Thank you, Councilor Presley, and thank you all for being here this evening. Just very quickly, I will have to maybe leave a few minutes early. I'm going to hang in there as long as I can. But I do want to say, as an Arab, as a former high school teacher in Boston, and as a former high school student who participated in the rewrite of the Code of Conduct so many years ago, through my membership of Boston Student Advisory Council as a kid, empowering kids and including our youth in this process is so important. And for me, it's so exciting to support the work of Councilor Presley and to really be a little bit of a cheerleader for her and really witness the work that you've done to bring our youth, and in particular our girls, into this work very directly. So I'm excited to be here and to support you in your work and support all of this. I think it's fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilor. Okay, so now we're just going to get right into it. And first, we are going to hear from Senior Research Policy Fellow from the National Black Women's Justice Institute and a former intern of mine, Aisha Yusuf. Okay. And so while she is situated, oh no, take your time. Ready? Yeah. Okay. All right. So just your name and affiliation for the record, and then we'll hear your testimony.
Absolutely. My name is Aisha Yusuf, and I'm a Senior Education Policy Fellow at the National Black Women's Justice Institute. So I apologize also that I have to have my computer. I know if it's blocking, but when your printer breaks, that's what happens. So I'll just begin. My school actually did something. After it all happened, they gathered a bunch of us black kids. We sat down. All the administration, all of the teachers, all of the faculty, the janitors. We sat down in the auditorium and we led the conversation. Like, after we had that meeting, you could just tell there was a change in the vibes in the classroom. They were more understanding. I think the student-led conversation was so beneficial. That was a black Dominican girl that attended school in Boston. I'm sorry, this is very echoey. Is that okay? Okay. All right. Good evening, distinguished member of the Boston City Council, and thank you, Councilor Presley, for this invitation to partner with you on this important topic. My name is Aisha Yusuf, and I'm the Senior Education Policy Fellow at the National Black Women's Justice Institute. I will refer to as NBWJI for the rest of this presentation. This past July, as Councilor Presley said, we partnered with Councilor Presley to conduct focus groups with over 100 girls of color, parents, and school personnel. The girls range in age from 9 to 18. The girls we spoke with identified as Black, Afro-Latina, Latina, and Asian. The majority of the girls identified as African American, Haitian, Trinidadian, Nigerian, Somalian, Cape Verdean, Caribbean, Dominican, and Puerto Rican. The girls identified across religious and socioeconomic backgrounds. Most of the girls we spoke with attended Boston public schools and charter schools. However, we did talk to girls who were in the METGO program and a few that attended private and religious institutions. During this process, we also spoke with school personnel. School personnel was kind of the catch-all phrase we used to categorize a group. In the group, however, we spoke with, they self-identified as principals, assistant principals, trauma specialists, administrators, guidance counselors, teachers, and others working in the district office. Throughout these remarks, I will use quotations from all of the focus groups that I conducted in July. What we know is school discipline data and the conversation with girls of color expose a complex and educational experience that is often influenced by systemic, structural, and individual biases that leave girls vulnerable to differential treatment, that discourages school participation, and in some instances leads to failure to complete school altogether. Across this nation, Black and Latina girls are disproportionately experiencing what we call school confinement pathways. That is a term coined by Dr. Monique Morris. These are the policies and practices and the prevailing consciousness that leads girls into contact with the juvenile court and criminal system. These pathways may include citations to appear before a disciplinary board or juvenile court, school-based referrals to law enforcement for non-criminal offenses, or arrests made directly on campuses. They may also include actions that remove girls from schools and leave them susceptible to participation in underground economies and future contact with the juvenile and criminal legal system. Our research and scholarship at NBWJI, as well as Dr. Morris's and other scholars, reveal that the critical pathways to school push-out for girls are as follows. A reliance on punitive school discipline in response to nonviolent student behavior too often unnecessarily removes girls from their classrooms and schools. Differential dress code enforcement, which may lead to body shaming, body policing, chronic suspension, expulsion, or absence. Gender-based violence on campus that often goes unaddressed, which may lead to school avoidance or other physical altercations or assaults. Increased surveillance or presence of law enforcement in schools, which increases citations and or stress among girls of color. And a failure among adults in schools to recognize and respond to the trauma of girls of color when symptoms manifest in the learning environment. It is important that I state, too often in this work, school districts, teachers, administrators, counselors, and school resource officers often get demonized or feel demonized in these conversations. Too often, the narrative that adults in space with children and young people are intentionally causing harm or intentionally being negligent, intentionally being racist or biased. To be clear, yes, those people absolutely exist. However, from my experience through countless conversations with teachers and school administration and staff, the truth is teachers and administrators want to do a good job, want to do right by children, and want their students to feel loved, protected, and honored, as well as their families. It's not my intention to create a picture that centers on the failures of school officials and educators. To the contrary, my goal is to highlight what school administrators in Boston are doing a great job in, what their intentions behind their choices are, and where they, students and parents, believe they can do better. What I found interesting in conducting these focus groups is that the students and the school personnel discussed for the most part very similar ideas. What that tells me is that students see and feel what's happening, teachers and staff see it as well, but there seems to be a disconnect in how we move forward. Yeah, we got into a brawl or whatever, me and this white girl. I mean, she started it, but whatever, we got into a fight. So she got suspended for 2 weeks, but I got expelled. But we were both fighting. Why did I get expelled and she got suspended? Stated one student. Like, I got suspended for skipping detention. Then I got suspended for talking back to my teacher. I guess I get suspended for anything, said another student. The idea of differential treatment was felt by students, but also recognized by school personnel. One school personnel representative stated, "I see it all the time. Sometimes it's unintentional, but we all see it. One kid gets suspended, and the next week, another kid does the exact same thing and doesn't. There are often other factors at play, but I see it, and it's not fair." I want to take a step back, however. For the most part, many of us agree that one of the purposes of school rules, discipline, and codes of conduct are to increase school safety. When I asked students what being safe at school meant, many stated that safety was physical, emotional, and mental. One student stated, "I want to feel safe, like that no one's going to beat me up or have a gun, but also I want to feel like safe to express how I feel and that teachers will listen." To this end, school personnel also describe school safety as incorporating these same elements. One representative said, "It's about emotional safety as well as physical safety." We're very big on visible safety, and I think the school has grown over the past few years on emotional safety. We've expanded this to include gender and LGBTQ students as well. They went on to say, "But also school has to be safe for parents. The kids have been suspended multiple times, and I think families are afraid of school. I think we have a big push around the culture of we, so that families feel safe, because a lot of them, they just don't." Another school representative said, "So when I think of safe, I don't think of just emotional and physical, I think of mental as well. Because these kids are walking in with so much baggage from that day or that night that our staff," and when I say our staff, I mean the whole staff, from the custodian to the headmaster, has to be trained on what to do and what to do, because the problem is not solved by one person in this building. Across the nation, many school districts, including Boston, have law enforcement on campus to create an idea of physical safety. However, what that has done is increase surveillance, which has led to an increase of citations, referrals, and stress among girls of color. In the data fact sheet that I believe was available for you when you walked in, you'll see that in Boston, Black females were 5.5 times more likely than white girls to be arrested or referred to law enforcement from school. Some girls express that the presence of law enforcement can make them feel unsafe, uneasy, or on edge. One girl stated, "At my school, the cops just sit outside and wait in vans. Vans, just to round up kids. How do you think that makes us feel? Like they're just waiting for us to be criminals." As noted in a recent report done by NBWJI in partnership with the Georgetown Center on Poverty and Inequity, the report is titled "Be Her Resource, a Toolkit about School Resource Officers and Girls of Color." One of the issues that they talked about facing law enforcement on campus is the lack of relevant training and the lack of delineation between roles and responsibilities. The need of relevant training was also noted by school officials during the focus group. One representative said, "School resource officers, school police, Boston-based police in schools should be the ones that first get this training. They need to know how to de-escalate, how to deal with adolescents, and how to notice trauma. Because they are the ones who are, when the situation occurs in any school, they respond. They sometimes cause more conflict and more issues for our young people than necessary because they don't know what to do." Too often, our intent of creating policy does not reflect the impact it has on girls. During these focus groups, we spoke with a range of girls, yet many of their experiences and their stories were very similar. When we asked girls what are some of the major things they get in trouble for at school, most of them said dress code. They said they understand they want them to look presentable, but they said the definition changed depending on who you were and what you looked like. I need teachers in administration who, understand. I cannot help that I have thick thighs and a big butt. I can't help it. That is literally how I was made, and I need teachers to know that. So no, I can't always cover up my body like they want us to. It just looks like that," said one student. Another student said, "I'm Black, so my natural hair is big and curly. I wore it out once. They sent me to the principal's office to tie it down because it was distracting other students. That was the last time I did that." It depends. Sometimes we get sent home because of dress code violation, which is dumb, because I think you're telling us that our clothes are more important than our education, stated one student. When I asked the school personnel, in their opinion, what are black and brown girls getting in trouble for at their school, they stated, they get in trouble for things that stem from what happened on the previous night, on Facebook, on Snapchat, and Instagram, but mostly attitudes, being provocative, emotional outbursts, dress codes, and physical violence. What I find interesting about this response is that, according to the data represented on that fact sheet, in Boston, Black girls were 5 times more likely to receive 1 or more out-of-school suspension than white girls. And Latina girls were twice as likely than white girls to receive 1 or more out-of-school suspension or in-school suspension. So if girls are in trouble for attitudes being provocative, emotional outbursts and dress codes, things that are discretionary in nature, there must be a better way that we can do something aside from exclusionary practices that facilitate a behavior outcome. Research and data have also pointed toward the differential treatment of girls of color due to lack of cultural competency, cultural relevance, and knowing and understanding the girls in their classroom. Many of these girls stated that they have been disciplined for being loud or having an attitude. One girl said, "We're always in trouble for being loud. Once you get past quiet, you're loud. Well, if you're black." This is also very relevant when thinking about dress code enforcement and communication styles. In Boston, the majority of children that attend public schools, public and charter schools, are of color. However, the teaching and administration staff are not. One school staff member said, "Yes, the truth is most of our kids in Boston are of color, and most of the teachers and staff are not. We talk about race in our school, but not always in a constructive way. That centers on meeting the needs of those kids. It's mostly about data. And when we do talk about race, we talk about boys. It's true, boys are usually the ones that are fighting. That's because we aren't looking at what's happening with our girls. Maybe it's that we aren't valuing their needs." The lack of cultural sensitivity, awareness, and training came up from the students, parents, and school personnel. These conversations included more than just the obvious difference between the predominant student of color population and the white teaching staff, but also how the lack of cultural understanding leads to issues in the classroom. One parent said, "Boston has so many kids that are first and second generation, kids from Haiti, Somalia, Dominican Republic, Ethiopia, but our schools have no culture to embrace that." A school personnel representative said, "Most of our staff does not live in the city of Boston. They live outside the city. They're not coming from these communities. They read the paper, they look at Facebook, and oh, the crime rate's gone up in the city, and teachers come here scared." A student provided a very clear and simple explanation of how the lack of cultural understanding can lead to classroom disruption and out of classroom time for students. The student said, "At my school, there are no hats. You know, some black girls at my school, their weave gets messed up and their tracks are showing. Sometimes you gotta wear a hat to cover that. It's embarrassing. But my school doesn't allow that. One day a whole argument started in my class and my friend got kicked out. I was like, dang, she wanted to be here, but her weave was messed up. What's the big deal?" What's interesting is that a representative from a school personnel had a very similar response. She said, "Teachers don't understand that a kid sitting in class with a hood over their head and doing work, or at least not bothering somebody, you have no idea what that kid went through that day. We understand that it's not school policy to have a hood on, but the kids sometimes have to deal with so much at home, they need to feel safe, and sometimes a hood is how they do that. And teachers, so many teachers don't understand that. They follow policy to a T, and they're not empathetic to that. So instead of letting them do their work, there becomes a battle for no reason." A parent said, "My daughter witnessed another child being asked, 'Where do you live?' And in our community, children are taught at a certain age, you don't tell anybody where you live because that's gang recruitment type talk. But a teacher disciplined the child. She said, 'You're being rude for not telling them.' The teacher didn't understand." Another student said, "Metco's cool, but it's so white, like so white. They expect me to talk to, and how do they expect me to talk to any adult here? You have no idea what's going on with me or who I am." This is not to indicate that teachers coming from different socioeconomic, racial, or ethnic backgrounds cannot be effective. What it indicates is that when training is inadequate and empathetic discipline is not enforced, there are often missed opportunities and students become collateral damage in this process. One of the questions and concerns I hear coming from educators when we talk about discipline is what exactly is the role of a teacher and an educator? I often remark that when we need to begin to train and talk to our educators, that the role of an educator is in fact dynamic. It changes and it evolves. The way in which we discuss the concept was reiterated by some of the school personnel in the focus group. One person stated, "We all wear multiple hats at our school. Miss X may be the English teacher. She may also be the only person that a certain student trusts. Miss X may be like, whoa, that's a really issue for the nurse. But because the student trusts Miss X, we need to help Miss X know how to handle the situation and what to do. Yes, I understand this is also an issue of resources. As indicated by many in the school personnel focus group, one person stated, some schools have limits. Counselors can only see students who have certain insurances, and they can only see them individually. So often other staff end up doing social work groups, doing trauma screenings, and on top of that, meeting with administrators to figure this out. Another person said, too many schools have no guidance counselors, no trauma specialists, no social workers, so it falls on the teachers and administration. Administration can't be all of that for students, so it falls on teachers. And teachers don't have the training, so no one wins. Another person said, only 10 schools have a trauma specialist, 10 out of 126, and there are so many kids that need this type of attention. This places a strain on school staff, but again, kids suffer. As one student stated, sometimes I think I just need someone to talk to. Like for real, if I had someone to talk to sometimes, I wouldn't freak out so much. Another student said, we have a counselor twice a week, but I have issues more than twice a week. My purpose this evening was not only to discuss the local manifestation of national problem, but to partner with the Boston City Council and community of impacted students and parents to develop solutions. Fortunately, the school discipline conditions that I mentioned here tonight are not insurmountable. There are solutions, and many schools, administrators, and teachers and counselors in Boston are working on them. However, instead of me providing my recommendations, I'm going to use the voice of those I focus grouped. They provide relevant and tangible ways forward. Here's what the student said. Like, you're white, but all the kids are not. So have trainings and workshops, but also make sure that there are spaces for students to sit down. You know, debrief with students sometimes. Like our resource officer, he's white. He walks around the school, talks to us, always happy, fist bumps the students. He makes us feel like we're welcome and comfortable. He gets to know us. Have more guidance counselors and cops in our schools. Get to understand the root of the problem instead of just suspending kids. Suspending a kid doesn't make any sense to me. There's no logic behind it. To me, you don't learn anything from suspension. That's what some of the students said. Now here's some of the recommendations from school personnel. Teachers, schools, principals, no one wants high suspension data at their schools, so we can make this data work any way we want. So today, instead of traditional suspension, schools will give a therapeutic dismissal, or they'll make you constructively present. This way, it's not an actual suspension on books. I get it, but this is not helping the situation, and we are harming kids. A principal said, having a team of people that respect young people is key. That's first for me. So in hiring, you have to make it really clear about how we treat people in our schools. And then we broaden that message to the community around us, so everyone that walks through this door understands how we behave in this school. Administrators need to be involved. They need to understand what our push-out looks like. It looks different here in Boston. In some cases, our school-to-prison pipeline does not look the same as it does across other states. Because arrests that are school-related don't always happen on school campus. That doesn't mean we haven't pushed our kids out. If you look at our juvenile facilities, you can see that we have. One person said, as a counselor, I always call my kids. And yes, it takes a while. I introduce myself. Hi, I'm the guidance counselor. If you need anything, this is who I am, and this is where I'll be. At my school, we started having teachers call parents for positive things that kids are doing. Because what happens is, we call them only for bad things, and so they expect us to call for bad things. That does nothing for parent engagement. Our school started doing restorative justice circles daily, and that lowered our disciplinary issues by more than half. So this is what our school personnel said. There's so much great work happening in Boston, it's very clear, but it takes an entire body, this body, the community, students, parents, and us as a community to increase the capacity and move forward.
for laboring in love every day for our girls, because I know that you and Dr. Morris believe and affirm that our girls are sacred and loved, and are trying to make sure the rest of us catch up to that. So I thank you very much. I know we do want to get to hearing from the schools, so I just wanted to make sure my colleagues did not have a question for you. Okay. All right, thank you. Okay, yes, Dr. Estrada. So we'll hear from the BPS panel now. Okay. Dr. Estrada, Colin, Dr. Menendez. Okay, panel one. Okay. Good evening, thank you for joining us. If you'll just cite your name and affiliation for the record, and we'll hear your testimony.
Good evening. Thank you, Councilor Presley, for inviting Boston Public Schools to discuss girls of color. My name is Dr. Carla Estrada. I'm the Deputy Superintendent of Academics and Student Support Services for Boston Public Schools. BPS is very proud of the overall efforts in building high-quality academic and social-emotional instruction and programming for all of its students. However, BPS is fully aware that opportunity achievement gaps exist, and that we also have been deeply committed to building awareness and addressing this clear problem in practice. For girls of color, and as a woman of color in BPS, I welcome the conversation to ensure that we are not perpetuating marginalization and that we address factors that may impede girls of color from developing into self-determined, independent learners able to pursue their aspirations. If you permit us, I would like to start with introducing Dr. Colin Rose, who is our Assistant Superintendent of Opportunity Achievement Gaps, who will share with you the bias and particular programming and BPS efforts that we've been leading in the effort to foster positive identity among our most marginalized students, and for today in particular, our girls of color. Then Dr. Amalio Nieves, Assistant Superintendent of Social Emotional Learning and Wellness, will highlight some of the instructional and wellness accomplishments and work that we are also leading. And finally, Mr. Sam DePina will discuss the key steps taken to address discipline and code of conduct as it relates to girls of color. With that, let's begin with Dr. Rose.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Thanks for having me. The Office of Opportunity Achievement Gaps has many initiatives that intersect with issues concerning young women of color, either directly or indirectly. While programmatic pieces are important, there's much systematic work that needs to continue in order to address many of these concerns systematically and culturally within the school department. For that, I would like to take a quick look at the social paradigm we're dealing with. Much like Boys of Color, articles like Girlhood Interrupted by Georgetown Law discusses the adultification of girls of color. Researchers studied educational professionals from multiple levels of the K-12 system and their perceptions of black girls ranging from years 5 to 14 years old. The results showed that in comparison to their white counterparts, black girls were perceived to need less nurturing, protections, support, comfort, were judged to be more independent, to know more about adult topics, including sex. These are beliefs in line with the historical false narrative created out of slavery, that black girls are hypersexual, aggressive, unscrupulous, less innocent, less feminine, etc., and connect to the black girls receiving less protection and harsher consequences, both in our classrooms and in the street. Unless all of our agencies continue to work on creating environments where the expectation that we all are aware of racism, bias, intersectionality, our own cultural frames, and how that relates to our policies, our structures, and our practices, we'll be back here again. It's not about a to-do list. It's about a mindset shift and a fundamental change in practice. Having said that, there are some specific ways in which the Office of Opportunity Achievement Gap goes about trying to influence that system. Systematically, we have the Opportunity Achievement Gap policy and its implementation plan. That covers 100+ SMART and process goals across the central office in our schools under the theory of targeted universalism. This strategic plan pushes equity with concrete goals, from more culturally appropriate lunches with food services to decolonizing our curriculum with academics and everything in between. The goals focus on cultural proficiency, dismantling structural barriers, providing greater access to opportunities, and bolstering ecological supports through authentic partnerships with students, families, and communities. We are also leading the commitment to culturally and linguistically sustaining practices across all layers of BPS. I'll denote that CLSP. CLSP pushes 3 competencies that all staff in BPS need in order to be more effective in working across cultures and change the paradigm between the system and historically marginalized populations. These include, first, awareness. We need the knowledge of our social political reality, landscape, both historically and structurally today in Boston and the United States, and how that connects to our personal bias and our structural biases that are currently in the system. 2, cultural learning and relationship building. This is building authentic cultural knowledge of students, families, and the communities that they come from, checking your assumptions and judgments, building trusting relationships with students, especially marginalized dependent learners, so they can be pushed to their proximate zone of development. And 3, the construction of a repertoire of culturally and linguistically sustaining practices, which means that you have the skills to adapt and ameliorate classroom and institutional practice based on the satisfaction of the prior 2 competencies, further gained through the further knowledge and relationships of students, families, and communities. The goal is to increase cognitive capacity of our students through connections to their cultural schema and developing critical consciousness. These are continuous cycles of learning, not a fixed destination. CLSP is supported by continuous system-wide professional development, many systematic goals that find themselves in the OAG policy and implementation plan, and instruments such as the BPS racial equity tool that we are currently using in central office. Last year, our work centered out of our office on the construct of race and the manifestations of racial bias, such as white privilege, internalized racism, and implicit bias. This year's work will include issues of intersectionality with our principles, including factors of race, culture, gender, sexual orientation, and poverty. Finally, we also have some targeted programming. One example of that is the 10 Boys and 10 Girls initiative. Director of Targeted Programming, Doncor Isa, joins us in the crowd, who runs that. This is curriculum that provides affirmation, rites of passage to students of color, both our female and male students of color, and is aligned to the ELA and social studies curriculum standards. Success Mentors, which targets chronically absent students, one-on-one with mentors. The Exam School initiative that was providing tutoring for students who are going to take the ISE test for exam schools, balancing the racial balance within that program. Early warning indicator systems, trying to provide a safety net for students so that we don't learn at the end of the year that they failed all their courses, but we're constantly progress monitoring. And an initiative called Excellence for All that I don't have enough time to get into, but really it's trying to think of what is the most appropriate model to make sure that all of our students get the most rigorous, affirming, educational experience outside of our special programs like exam schools and advanced work class. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Amalia Nieves, but that's some of the work that we're doing out of the Office of Opportunity and Achievement Gaps. And thank you for having me.
Thank you, Dr. Rose. Good evening. Thank you for this opportunity. The Boston Public Schools strives to be one of the healthiest school districts in the country, and research shows that healthy students are better learners. We are committed to promoting the social, emotional, and physical wellness of all students to support both their healthy development and readiness to learn. We know that addressing these 3 dimensions of wellness are key to closing the opportunity and achievement gaps. Research also indicates that health inequities interfere with learning and disproportionately impact low-income youth of color. In order to close the access and achievement gaps, And for tonight's conversation, especially for girls of color, we must address health inequities that make it difficult for students to focus on learning and contribute to them missing school. Therefore, our superintendent has identified wellness as a key strategy for addressing our problem of practice, helping to provide authentic learning experiences for all students and closing opportunity and achievement gaps. Our wellness policy creates the roadmap for ensuring that all BPS schools are safe, healthy, and sustaining. And our wellness policy has been nationally recognized as one of the most comprehensive in the country. It links existing and new district health-related policies in the 8 policy components, including health and physical education and physical activity, health services, safe and supportive schools, food and nutrition, healthy school environment, and cultural proficiency. The wellness policy strives to ensure equity of programs and multi-tiered systems of support for all of our students across prevention, intervention, and intensive response so that we can address the needs of our most marginalized students. That goes to the heart of the problem, to the heart of the BPS problem of practice. The Office of Sell Well is comprised of the following departments: athletics, behavioral health, guidance, health and wellness, health services, opportunity youth, and Succeed Boston. These departments collaborate to help schools build the multi-tiered systems of supports that they need to implement health-related policies, create safe, healthy, and welcoming school environments, and deliver explicit instruction, programs, and services to students and families. And Jill Carter, who is the Senior Executive Director of the Office of Social Emotional Learning and Wellness, will be testifying later, and she'll go deeper into the work. But some of the work that the office has been engaging in has related to trauma-informed practices in our school, positive behavior interventions and support, restorative justice, using physical activity in the classroom to address behavior. And so Jill will go later on into those pieces, but I just wanted to give a taste of some of the efforts that we're doing to address the needs of our most marginalized students.
So would you like the next group, or would you like us to open up to any questions? So we have Mr. Sandakina could go into more of the code of conduct and discipline efforts that have been happening. Oh, sure. Well, we could switch off and then they could come on. It's up to you. Or we could just have them come and sit on that side. Okay. If we can have Mr. Sam Dakina, our operational superintendent, Jill Carter, who is our executive director, health and wellness. Can you hear? And then Stephen Chen, who's here from our equity office, who's been doing a lot of work on welcoming school environments.
Good evening. So first I want to thank Councilor Burke and Councilor Sabi George for having us here this evening to talk about the work that we do in BPS and to bring these issues to light so we can take these recommendations seriously and really enhance the work that's really needed in this area. So thank you for that.
Thank you for being here. So just name and affiliation for the record and your testimony, whatever order.
Sure. Sam Depina, Operational Superintendent.
Hello, Jill Carter, Senior Executive Director of the Office of Social Emotional Learning and Wellness.
And I'm Stephen Chen. I am the Senior Equity Manager in the Office of Equity.
So regarding the code of conduct work that we've been doing over the last few years and more recently, we took it very seriously about updating our code of conduct to reflect best practices around the country as well as here in Massachusetts. As many of you know, we were the first school district to revise our policies ahead of Massachusetts General Laws 222, and we worked real diligently to provide a lot of professional development over the years for our staff and our students regarding the changes that we felt were best practices. This year, more recently, over the summer, we engaged in a campaign to do a membership drive of our Code of Conduct Advisory Council. Our Code of Conduct Advisory Council is a body that we've established over the years to help synthesize all of our advisement opportunities from the community to meet collectively, discuss issues around the Code of Conduct, and give us feedback and advice on our policies and our revisions to our Code of Conduct. And we had a successful couple of drives that yielded new membership. And that new membership we're very excited about. We're excited about it because it's a great opportunity for us to take on some of these issues with that advisory body. That advisory body is made up of students, advocates, teaching staff at schools, and some central office membership facilitates those conversations. So Amalia and I do that work jointly. And we have other members here that also help us with that endeavor. But we're excited to really take a closer look at the Code of Conduct this year through this lens, particularly the dress code policy. I think we have a lot of work that we need to do in that area, and we'd love to engage in some focus groups and engage in some opportunities for females to give us more feedback specifically from their perspective. So we'll be folding that piece of the conversation into our dialogue with the Code of Conduct Advisory Council. We'll also take a closer look at the development of our professional development and what that means for our staff and what that means for our teachers and our families as well. We want to make sure that we educate all participants and constituents with regard to the Code of Conduct. So we're excited about going forward with that work. So it's very timely. We're very excited about it, and we're very excited that this lens has been, brought to our attention, so that we can really take a closer look. So thank you.
Thanks. Okay. I'm going to highlight a few of the initiatives and the programs and services that the Office of Social Emotional Learning and Wellness has that are going to address the social, emotional, and physical well-being of girls of color as well as all of our students. As Amalio said, we know that addressing the three dimensions of wellness, the social, emotional, and physical well-being of students is critical to closing the opportunity and achievement gaps. The Office of Social Emotional Learning and Wellness is working on both prevention and intervention strategies, and those cut across our 9 departments and 17 programs. I'll just highlight a few. The Boston Public Schools wellness policy requires comprehensive pre-K to 12 health education that is medically accurate, age and developmentally appropriate, culturally inclusive, and implemented in safe and supportive learning environments where all students feel valued. All schools must provide health education, including the BPS Health and Safe Body Unit in grades 4 and 5, and 2 semesters of health education in grades 6 through 8 taught by a licensed health ed teacher, and 1 semester of health ed in total in grades 9 through 12 taught by a licensed health education teacher. BPS supports comprehensive sexual health education for grades K through 12, which includes lessons on many topics, some of which I just want to mention because they address some of the things we heard in the report earlier. These include healthy relationships, personal safety, boundaries, addressing gender stereotypes, advocating for gender social justice, sexual orientation and identity, addressing sexual abuse and harassment, safe and supportive school environment, consent, dating violence, and gender diversity. Our wellness policy also requires social emotional learning instruction, and the office has a very big rollout of a social emotional learning program underway. We will be teaching explicit social emotional skills, and we will also be training adults to improve the school climate as a part of that initiative. In collaboration with other of the other division departments, we are rolling out training for teachers and school leaders around how to create safe, healthy, and sustaining learning environments. The Behavioral Health Services Department is working with all schools to improve culture and climate, and are working intensively with 60 schools to increase the capacity of schools to meet the behavioral health needs of students through the comprehensive behavioral health model. BPS is also working proactively to train teachers and staff about the impact of trauma on learning. The MOVA grant and the Office of Behavioral Health Services have provided a wide range of training to schools on how to set up safe and supportive schools, the impact of trauma on learning, and resources related to trauma. Recently, we have received some additional funding and supports for restorative practices through a $2.8 million grant with the American Institute for Research, Suffolk University's Center for Restorative Justice, and the Office of Selwell. BPS will embark on the provisions of services to 30 middle and high schools to evaluate the effectiveness of the Circle Forward whole school restorative practices intervention on school safety and student outcomes in high-risk, high-need communities. Through negotiations with the BTU, there will be a new district-wide coordinator for restorative justice. The coordinator will provide professional development to school-based RJ leads across the district and will begin implementation of school-wide restorative justice practices in 3 schools in 2017 and 2018. Sorry, just a few more highlights. We launched last year the Out for Safe Schools Badges campaign to ensure that lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, or questioning students and their families feel welcomed and affirmed in every school community. The program is a partnership of the Boston Public Schools Health and Wellness Department, the Safe and Welcoming Schools Specialist, Glisson, Massachusetts, Los Angeles LGBT Center, and the National GSA Network. We have also been engaged with the Boston Public Health Commission in a Safe Routes to School Boston campaign, which is a citywide effort to make it safer for students to walk to school. And of course, we've been working tirelessly to implement the Expecting and Parenting Teen Policy, which we passed a few years ago with your support. There's many other really important programs that I haven't had a chance to mention, but I hope that I'll get an opportunity to share as we move along in testimony.
Very good. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you so much for hosting this important conversation. Again, I'm from the Office of Equity with BPS, and what I wanted to do is share 2 ways that the Office of Equity has a lot of touch points with the work that has already been shared. And so the first way is actually through our enforcement role with the district. So under Superintendent Circular EQT3, the Office of Equity is actually charged with enforcing the sexual misconduct policies in the district. And so what that means is we have incidents that happen in our schools, both employee on employee, employee on student, and student on student, involving both sexual harassment and potentially sexual assault. Those are all referred to the Office of Equity so that we can provide support and oversee an investigation into these allegations. Along those same lines, we also train all of our our school administrators and central office supervisors on equity protocols, which also includes information about the obligation for all school staff to report incidents of sexual misconduct to the Office of Equity. We've also worked with BSAC, the Boston Student Advisory Council, to include this information, both on the BSAC Know Your Rights app, as well as students and anyone who uses that app can submit reports to our office of things that are happening in their schools, including sexual harassment, through that app. And then finally, we've also conducted some significant outreach for students and parents on how to report incidents to us. Last year, we hosted a poster campaign where students did art projects, and we picked a couple of winners that then we now have posters in all of our schools. So if you see Office of Equity posters, those are all that campaign we did. We did intercom announcements, and we also redeveloped our website. So that's sort of the enforcement part of this work, to make sure that we keep our schools safe and basically inclusive. But along those same lines, we also are involved in support. So earlier we heard testimony about the school dress codes. The Office of Equity recently developed and published a model dress code that is intended to eliminate gender distinctions between male and female students and how they're supposed to dress. This model policy is not required for all schools, but it's intended to be a guidance and a starting point for school site committees to both examine and revise their dress code so that one gender is not disproportionately impacted. That really resonated with me earlier in your testimony, because that is something that's just not happening in BPS but around the country with gender practices. And then finally, the last piece that I wanted to share is we also do a lot of trainings through our we have two different levels of trainings. The first one is we have a comprehensive gender identity and expression policy in our district. And we do trainings for schools. We did 24 of these trainings last year for school staff, specifically on the best practices to support our gender non-conforming students. And then for our K-5 schools, we actually have a specific program called Welcoming Schools. And what Welcoming Schools is a program developed out of a human rights campaign, and it's a comprehensive approach for schools to support LGBTQ students in K-5 settings. And last year we conducted 37 trainings across 10 schools, and each school goes through about 12 hours of PD and a lot of other comprehensive support before they can be certified as a seal of excellence school through the human rights campaign.
Okay. All right. Thank you all for your testimony. We do have a couple of questions, and we're all going to try to air for the brevity here because we have many school personnel here. We want to hear from them. And I do want to do, your presentation was comprehensive, and I want to be fair, but let's just keep in mind that this is the beginning of an ongoing conversation, so we may not get to everything this evening. So my first question is, could you tell me how many school resource officers we have? Okay. 75.
Just, I want to recognize that Chief Weston is here also from our Boston School Police Department to support this ongoing effort.
Yes. We thank you for being here. We thank you both for being here and for what you do every day. Thank you very much. Okay. And so, maybe I should have you here. One of the things that came out of the girls listening session was that some of them felt that when there were girl fights, that school resource officers were less inclined to intervene because they were worried about them being disciplined or how they were physically touching or engaging a girl student. And I just was curious if there is different training based on gender. Okay, all right. Okay. Could you just tell me again for the restorative justice practices, how many schools those will be in?
30.
Okay. So in 30.
Formal training, but there's other schools who've been practicing restorative justice outside of that.
Okay. And so getting to that larger issue of equity, do we have a sense in terms of the full catch-all, how many of our schools are practicing restorative justice?
No, we've been working with the Boston Teachers Union to get that number. They have a restorative justice committee, so we've been trying to work with them to get a feel for where the practices are happening and at what level.
Okay. All right. And then, yes, the dress code and the body shaming, that came up over and over again in our focus groups. And so I appreciate your wanting to have a policy that is not having a disparate impact based on gender, but we see that it's having a disparate impact within girls based on race. And so Sam, what are your thoughts about how we're going to get at that?
I think from a punitive standpoint, I think that's where we want to make sure that there's alignment between the best policy dress code from the equity office and alignment with the code of conduct, and maybe work at ways or towards ways where it's less punitive and more understanding and culturally sensitive to our students. So we'll have to create some focus groups, have more dialogue about that, get feedback from females of color, and really look at that more carefully and come up with some better recommendations.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Also, I think beyond the technical rules-based guardrails, we have to be honest about the conversations we need to have around girls of colors in the school. And the biases that come through, whether intentional or not, the actions of professionals in our district. And I think that's a conversation we've started, and we want to make bigger, broader, and deeper.
And I'm just curious, in the Office of Equity, have you seen, I can just tell you anecdotally, I've heard from the girls, but I'm curious, have you seen in this current political climate an uptick in reports to your office from students?
Yeah, so I don't have the exact numbers, but we have been tracking incidents in our office that are directly related to like the election and just like the new presidential administration. We don't have those numbers, but we do track those. And in terms of, we don't see an uptick across all the protected classes, but we certainly do we certainly have seen an increase in certain types of incidents that are occurring based around religion, based around race, and based around gender and specifically
Yes.
gender identity. Yeah.
Okay. And then I'm just curious, in your professional development and in your training, one of the other things that came up a lot from the girls, specifically our Muslim girls that wear hijabs, the harassment they experience, but also the feeling that even the educators weren't always sure how to engage them, that they felt uncomfortable with how many of the male educators were even engaging them. There was a lack of competency around how to engage them, so that they don't want to hug or fist bump or all these sorts of things. So I'm just curious, specifically for our students that are Muslim, is there specific training happening around that?
I think that was something that in the previous hearing that you had was really something that, at least for myself, I thought it was an important area that we have not been deeply reflective of, is those different intersections that may happen across religion, across gender, across race. I think that's where Dr. Rose has highlighted for us how we're truly being reflective around biases and how they may exist. Because the one thing about our schools, because they're so culturally diverse, linguistically diverse, every school is going to have many different experiences. And so how do we create the space where these kinds of conversations and awareness is truly built? So that way, at the school level, they're also making decisions based on what they understand is happening in their school. And I'll pass it to Dr. Rose, because I think he explained it very well.
Yeah, beyond the awareness of the paradigms, it's also, the second part of CLSP is cultural learning and relationship building. So you need to know me to teach me. So schools need the spaces to interrogate and investigate their knowledge of the students that are in front of them. And if it's not Muslim students, it's something else that'll pop up if we don't acclimate ourselves to do that work at the school level. And so I think it's twofold. We need to be specific about things that need to happen, but we also have to have a mindset that we actually need to know our students more deeply, and then we won't run into problems like that.
And thank you. And then my last question, we're trying to go to Councilor Sabi George, is could you speak to, what actually what is the role of the tardies are playing when it comes to, someone had testified at our girls listening only session that students with a certain number of tardies were being sent to appear before some sort of judge. And it seems that, again, if we're thinking about larger social determinants and inequities, that there are various reasons why disproportionately some students might be tardy more so than others, and then more of them are, getting comfortable with being in the system because they're having to come before a judge and sort of make that case. Is that familiar to any of you, or could you speak to how many tardies result in some sort of disciplinary action or having to appear before a judge?
Sure. So by law, we're required to report absences of anyone who's chronically absent over a certain threshold. And it's 8 days per semester, the first 8 days, and it triggers a response from our supervisor.
Absent or tardy?
It's absent, however, some of our policies are unaligned because so many tardies turn into absences.
That's my question, okay.
And we're working on addressing that problem.
Okay.
With Molly's office.
Okay.
So we're cognizant of that, and that's some of the work that we're just engaging in now. Because we know that it's disproportionate. We know that it's unfair for the tardies to turn to absences. So we're aware of it and we're working on it. But it is required by law to do the 8 absences, so we just have to clean that up a little bit more about.
Okay, 8 absences, but in terms of the policy for how many tardies turn into an absence, that is different school to school?
No, it's consistent district-wide, but we need to look at that more carefully.
Do we know what that number is? How many tardies?
8 tardies.
Okay, so 8 tardies equals an absence. Okay.
Administrators last year could pick 3 tardies, anywhere between 3 and 8 tardies, and call it an absence. And we changed the superintendent's circular so that it would be 8 tardies, and that way there would be consistency across.
Okay.
Because we noticed that as part of our attendance data dialogues, that when we looked at the policy, there was this huge glaring inconsistency.
Okay. And so do you guys track all of this along gender and racial demographics in terms of, who's data around, is there data collection around these
So there
policies?
is data in regards to being able to examine by gender, being able to examine by race. I think, however, I hope I say her name right.
Aisha's comment. I think one of the things around the data that makes it hard is that the quantitative data doesn't really reveal the story as well as the qualitative. So she did a beautiful job of sharing personal experiences, because that's actually, you don't see disproportionality in the data. So we looked at suspension, we looked at attendance, we were looking at, and there wasn't a glaring disproportionality issue around gender per se. You saw it slightly more when you brought in race and gender, but still the information of what actually girls in our school, girls of color are experiencing in our school, I think is, I think where you will be able to see that more efficiently and in a way that's really meaningful to be actionable is going to be at each of our schools. How do we have folks have conversations about, are there biases in our current policies and our code of conduct, as well as our interventions and supports that we have at the school level? Because it's really hard to see the data. Just if you look at numbers, it's not as glaring as we would like it to be. You'd have to really dig deep and really talk to people to really understand the experience of our girls of color right now based on the data.
Okay. All right. I just want to move to my good colleague here, Vice Chair of Education. I wanted to acknowledge, I was remiss to do it earlier, that we do have representation from District 4 City Councilor Andrea Campbell's office. She's the Chair of Public Safety and Criminal Justice, and has done a lot of work around stemming the tide and push out, especially for our girls. And so I just want to thank you for being here. Okay, Councilor South George.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. Just on the absences and really the attendance issues we face, I do want to just remind, just for the record, that attendance also impacts a student's ability to pass the MCAS or to appeal a very close score to pass the MCAS. So there are some attendance requirements. So the legitimate, full-fledged absences, and then sort of discerning from the tardy absences are important to know. And I also think that school start times has something to do with that, but that's another hearing order that I want to talk about. I do wonder how much we spend relying on schools that do have some of the better practices when it comes to code of conduct policies, dealing with whether it's suspensions or detentions or whatever those dress code policies. You know, have we looked at sort of the best practices across the district, whether it's just pieces of practice in our schools, and where that those school leaders who have implemented those best practices, how do they fit at the table?
Sure. So, luckily our schools love to learn from each other, between the administrations, between schools, teachers between schools. There's been a big push around kind of them helping and being their best teachers, if you will. We've highlighted different schools that are good at certain topics and alternatives. Some are good at restorative justice, some are good at PBIS, some are good at alternative to suspensions, and they also help us craft the PDs, and many of those schools also share their experiences with other schools and other staff that attend the PDs. So we're engaged in that work now, and what we'll be looking for is what other schools want to learn from other schools and create those opportunities in the professional development as we roll it out this year.
I'd also suggest, I think that's really important, that we're learning from those that are sort of digging out, whether it's the punishment or whatever the actions are, that we're learning from the school as opposed from the district to the schools the other way. I think it's also, I just lost my train of thought. I know what it was. The constructively present comment, I think that came up in the earlier presentation. That's very dangerous when we get into playing games with the codes for schools to either avoid, reporting certain data. Can we talk a little bit about how prevalent that is? As a former classroom teacher, I think that's sort of scary to me that anyone is playing those games, and I suppose maybe I'm a little naive to think that no one is, but could we talk a little bit about that and what happens when schools participate in that game?
Yeah, Dan, I think with the memo that we sent out to the schools, we wanted to provide clarity on what our expectations were about being sure that administrators were not marking students constructively present when they were not present on school grounds or they had been sent home. So a memo went out from the superintendent stating his clear expectations on how schools were to be recording these kinds of absences.
And just to be clear, counselors, so the policy, the district policy created a range originally. And so what we noticed in our data analysis was we needed to become very concrete with people about this is what it is in BPS. And so hence why the superintendent clarified what that was and sent a memo out to all administrators, clarifying exactly what the expectation was, because the policy actually allowed for that range before. So it's not that folks were playing games, it was the fact that that was the policy at the time. We just saw a pattern in the data that we needed to make sure that everyone was being consistent with what actually BPS policy was in that area.
Thank you, that's it for me. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, thank you all for actively listening and for your patience. And now we're going to move on to our tour of 4-H and Ashley Rose. Name and affiliation for the record, and whatever order you'd like to testify, we'll hear your testimony.
Thank you, Councilor Presley. My name is Ashley Rose, and I am the STEAM coordinator over at Davis Leadership Academy in Dorchester. So that's science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics, just in case people aren't familiar with the acronym.
Okay.
I'm Arturo Forrest. I'm the principal at Helen Y. Davis.
Okay, very good. Yes, thank you for joining us and for being educators. Okay, and so we'll hear your testimony.
I guess I'll open up with something that's pretty unique about our school is we take pride in the cultural aspect of our academics. That's something that's embedded from the first day we have our teachers on board is we cater to culture at our school. You know, we feel that we are one of the leaders in cultural education in the area. So if you look at any posters in our school, if you look at any of the literature, you know, we're big on cultural empowerment, and that's something that we feel drives instruction, discipline, and just the social aspect of what we do. All of our homerooms are named after historically black colleges and universities. We pride ourselves in having, in the spring to bring our alumni back, we try to, you know, mimic a homecoming event that you would see at a Morehouse or something of that nature. And we know that's key to what we do is, especially with the discipline, is making sure we have family involvement. That's something that's key in what we do in order to keep our suspensions down, is keeping them, you know, being involved with families and being a hands-on school. Something that's unique about my position, I pride myself a lot in being a girls basketball coach. This will be my 12th year in many different programs in the community near our school. So a lot of the young ladies recognize me for being in the different gyms and being in the community, and that's something that I like to use. So I take the principal hat off after school and get in there and coach with the young ladies. And one of the first things that comes up for me if a young lady does come into office is the first thing I want to know is what type of programming do we have here, and do we have programming that meets your needs? So something that's so important about the discipline that we do is if we do have a punishment, we want it to be a learning experience. And if there is an issue as far as discipline, we want to make sure we have the right enrichments in place to support not only you know, the social aspect, but the academics. Something about Massachusetts is, you know, it's one of the largest disparities for young women in access to sports. And so, you know, I make sure that they get a chance to see me not only as an administrator and somebody that's serious about discipline, but that I, you know, also want to take time to see them healthy, see them having an outlet, having a voice. You know, and I really pride myself in doing that extra work after school, and that's something that we really preach to the teachers that we get on board there is what type of after-school experience do they have, and is there anything with sports that we feel like can be a connection to our students. So that's something that's very key, is having, you know, not just one-dimensional educators, that we have educators that don't mind taking off the shirt and tie or the dress and, you know, mixing it up and being more one-on-one with our students and just building those relationships that come from the skills you get from the team building in the sports. And we feel like that cuts down tremendously on the discipline issues that, you know, you would normally have to deal with at a school. So we really pride ourselves on the athletics, being student athletes, and we feel like that's key. So one of the first questions I always ask if a student comes to the office for discipline is, you know, are they interested in any of our after-school programs? That has to be part of the conversation when dealing with parents or dealing with students that may have some, you know, issues or some triggers and things from, you know, trauma and things that come up in the neighborhood. So I just want to start with just saying that's very important to the culture that we can build, you know, being at a charter is, you know, taking some risk and doing some things that, you know, may seem outside of the box to some. So.
And what warrants discipline? So I'm just curious as to how large your student body is, because you offered a lot of examples where students were coming to your office directly, which is incredible access. And so I just wanted to get a better sense of that. You know, what would prompt someone to come to the office? Is it if they have a grievance, if they are being disciplined? Does every child that's being disciplined have to see you? And what sort of things are the students disciplined for?
We have a student support team, but we have a mixture of, you know, it's just an open access, and it's just something a little different. It may be for a grievance. It may be, you know, an initiative that they want to see, you know, taking place at the school. Sometimes it may be for redirection. But I like to be hands-on with our support team because that's more of my background in the coaching. I was a dean of discipline at a few other schools, so I like to have that approach, just not for the learning aspect, because we have to learn about them and build the relationship. So even down to having my email open to, you know, certain hours, that if anything that comes up, you know, the young ladies are free just to express themselves, to say what they want to have a voice, and you know, just be leaders, because that's something that we pride ourselves in, you know, at the academy, is the leadership piece. So we want them to have just as much say as I do, or as a, you know, a teacher that they may be close with. So it's just very important.
Do they have to wear uniforms? Do you have
Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay. And what would you say represents, just anecdotally, the lion's share of your having to discipline a student? Is it related to dress code or tardiness or classroom conflict or peer conflict? What do you think represents most of it?
As far as peer conflict, we do have groups set up on Fridays where, you know, the males come together and, you know, we address certain issues that may come up towards just manhood and being gentlemen. We try to let our teachers and some of the programs that we partner with handle a lot of the peer-to-peer issues. So, but for the most part, in my office, I mean, it's a mixture. It's a different variety, but more so for discipline, I would say, for redirection. And just, you know, making sure that, you know, they have a fair shot to express themselves if issues do come up in class where they may need a redirection or a cool down and things of that nature. We have a small support team, so I do take, you know, some of those issues very seriously, and you know, I just want to make sure, for the most part, that you know, suspension comes as a last resort. So.
Okay, very good. And then my last two questions are: do you practice any restorative justice? It sort of sounds peripherally like that might be true, but is that something practiced at the school?
Yes, we initially just started with some restorative justice work last year, so we're still, our staff is still formally being trained. But because of the setup of our school, it sort of organically happens where, you know, we have a student council, we have a support team that, you know, we go over, you know, different data and things of that nature often. And, you know, it is something where, you know, especially for the young ladies, you know, they get a good sense of speaking on some of the discipline policies and even speaking on certain ones that they may feel have been an issue in the past and need to be changed. So between our student council and just, you know, we have a great support team that, you know, some of those policies are in place as far as restorative justice, yes.
Okay. Ashley, did you want to offer something?
I think another one of the things that DLA does incredibly is actually hiring a staff that's reflective of the student body. We are a black school. I'll say it, black and brown. There are some white people, but they're down with the black and browns also. But in regards to myself, I myself went to BPS schools where I was on probation. I had a Corey. I was the little girl that kind of was disciplined out of classes. So I think that some of the students not only taking off our work hats and becoming coaches, but sharing personal stories of getting past that your past doesn't necessarily reflect your present, allowing them to realize through seeing other black women from Boston. Boston's one of those cities where people, especially, the college kids, they come in and out. It's very rare that they find people from Boston that have walked their walk and actually gotten somewhere after that. That's been a really big thing. And another one of the things in regards to restorative justice is I think DLA's been really good at hiring people who not only play sports, but using art as a means of actually letting them express themselves. Sometimes a little bit of poetry can find out a lot of the problems that they might have had, and we actually get them talking and solving issues on their own that they don't even see as issues anymore. They actually find them to be stanzas and poems that exist in ways that can get their stories told. Maybe, for example, we had one of our students who came out of a school in South Boston, and she's about my color, and she was teased terribly for being very chocolate at all predominantly white school in South Boston, but when she came to DLA, she had some of these same bullying habits because she was bullied, but she often references, we don't have a dean of discipline, we have student support. So you see the difference in the wording there. It was actually a male, Mr. Nazir, and she's actually going to be talking on WGBH tomorrow if you guys want to come hear her. But she'll be talking about how this male actually, for the first time a male stepped in her life, not only was she not afraid of him, but he actually had her rethink her way of thinking to solve problems. So we arm them with the tools to be able to get over things. We actually give them the representation of actually having people who have done it, and we give them an opportunity to get over it in creative ways. Discipline's one of those things where it immediately, sometimes the word is heavy and it has a negative connotation. But if you start to focus, I think, more on the positive, they hire people, like myself, I did AmeriCorps and taught peace first. So I think the same way violence is taught, if peace is taught first, naturally speaking, the disciplinary tactics, you just don't need it as much.
Okay, excellent. And Ashley, I was just curious, well, both of you can comment certainly, but are there any trends specifically that you're seeing with our girls of color that you wanted to highlight here, just in terms of their social, emotional well-being or life conflicts, dynamics, family models, anything that you wanted to make us aware of?
Definitely. Right now, these girls, I'm really excited. They're starting to know their beauty. We had one of our teachers last year. She made a beautiful song, actually. You guys should probably hear about Mr. Lovely. But going beyond their beauty and their bodies, though, beyond that, to realize that the sexual harassment, the comments on them, that's one portion of them, and we can definitely redirect the girls, but I think there has to be something for the males also. We can keep building strong women, but until we repair the broken men, I think that that's going to be something that, that's one trend I'm seeing. I'm seeing these girls that are really, really strong all the time, but we got to get the men to realize it's okay to be around strong women. And that's probably one of the trends that I'm seeing, is that they're making the space for these girls to feel beautiful, to be strong, but we got to be able to allow the boys to realize that's okay. And not necessarily feel in competition. And that's okay if they feel like they're in competition for a little bit, but I think if we get to that next step of actually realizing that beyond gender, we can all move forward, that'd be great. But that's one of the trends I'm noticing. The girls are getting strong, but we need the boys to be comfortable with that.
Okay. All right, thank you. Anything else you'd like to add?
I just want to just piggyback quickly off something that I'm most proud about at DLA is every second Friday we offer boys group training. So that's a chance to really, speak on women's empowerment and how important it is to, respect your mother, respect the women teachers at the school. And so we have a lot of dialogue with the young men in conjunction with the work, the women's empowerment work that, Ms. Rose and a few of our other teacher leaders do. And so it's just a time for all of us to appreciate each other and come together as a community. So if we didn't have that work with the young men, we would see more issues, that seem to be a problem in other schools.
Got it. And you're doing that work intentionally and not just sort of hoping that organically or by osmosis that happens. Although some of it might, but you're being intentional about that. So we thank you. Well, thank you for your participation this evening, and again, for being educators. And so
thank you, Councilor Presley, for leading a discussion on how to best support our girls, and particularly our girls of color. I'm going to start just with just a general statement and leave as much time for questions as I can. Start just by saying that obviously the needs of all of our kids are very different. What is universal is that the most important factor that defines our kids' schooling experience is the quality of the experience they have with their classroom teacher. A long line of research has demonstrated that schools work best when we empower our teachers to meet the varied needs of their kids. But delivering that kind of teaching isn't easy. Teaching is a knowledge profession and a massive challenge of leadership to do well. The onus of both challenging our kids and ensuring that they are known. There's so much that goes into that. And delivering on that promise requires that our schools have a laser-like focus on recruiting and developing great teachers, and it requires that schools provide teachers with the supports they need in order to deliver great teaching to their kids. So things like having small overall student loads so that teachers really have the time and capacity to know their kids. Structures and routines for teachers to provide individualized support and feedback throughout the day, and a nurturing, supportive, and calm learning environment in which transitions and disruptions are minimized. And research shows us, I think as you know, by the way, those are the kind of supports that are particularly important for students who've experienced significant trauma. At Brooke, we believe that our ability to provide that kind of environment is a big reason why our girls and our boys are achieving at high levels and report that they feel safe and known at school. But that's not to say that we can't do a lot better. And you know, the most interesting thing about this work continues to be thinking about how we can better support our kids. One of the things I'm most excited about is we've started this year piloting student circles both in high school and selected K-8 classrooms. So these are hour-long sessions each week focusing on developing social and emotional skill and a sense of agency and identity development. That's an example of both creating the structures and the professional development that can empower our teachers to meet the needs of our kids and to make sure that our kids are known and challenged and that they get the top-notch education they deserve.
Thank you. And when you say our girls report, how are you tracking that exactly?
Yeah, student surveys. And we use them primarily for feedback for teachers. And so they see that how kids report their experience in their classrooms. Again, going back to this belief that the most important thing for our kids is the experience they have with their classroom teachers. But we've also started to try to look at them across schools and compare them at schools within our network as well.
And can you speak to what represents the majority of incidents resulting in discipline, what that is at your school?
Yeah, I don't think there's a majority that falls in one category. You know, there's a whole range that will go from disrupting class to some type of bullying or meanness towards another student. Certainly there can be issues of like drug-related things or weapons or fights. Rare, but they're nonetheless. So I can't categorize what a majority is or even, frankly, like a large plurality.
And do you have a dress code at your school?
We do, yes.
Okay. And do you track, so is that one of the reasons also there might be disciplinary action? Compliance of the dress code or lack thereof?
Yeah, we've really moved over time to ensuring that if kids are out of dress code, that they come to the office and we have the means to get them in dress code and back to class. That's something I think we've learned and gotten better at over time, part of our education as well.
Okay, and are you also looking at, as a part of those dress code policies, hair? We're
not looking at hair. We don't have, we don't think we
or
have.
Or rather, there's no policy that speaks specifically to hairstyle or anything like that?
No, not to my knowledge, no.
Okay. Okay, all right, very good. And do you have any gender-sensitive or responsive programming at the school?
Yeah, and it depends.
You were speaking about a couple of new things, sort of identity and self-agency.
Yeah, we're 3 K-8 schools and a high school, so it can differ at each school. Our high school, for instance, has gender-specific advisories, so there'll be, and that's where these circles happen in that context. So they're groups of 10 to 14 kids, and they'll be all female and with a female advisor at the high school level. At some of our K-8s, there are girls groups for girls who might identify who we think could benefit for that kind of thing.
Okay. All right, very good. I don't have any additional questions.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, and now we'll hear from Boston Prep Charter School.
Good evening.
Good evening, thank you for joining us. And your name, please.
Yep, I'm Sharon Lazanki. I'm the Executive Director at Boston Prep Charter Public School in Hyde Park. Boston Prep is a small 6th through 12th grade charter school, currently enrolling 460 students and about 225 alumni that we support in college. At the core of our work is a commitment to ensuring our students' success in four-year college and their ethical growth, both in thought and action throughout that time. At the core of the work at Boston Prep is a realization and a desire that relationships and high expectations are at the core of what we do. And those relationships built between students, with teachers, with their advisors, and with our families work together to create a calm, urgent, structured learning environment that we hope promotes the emotional, physical, and mental well-being of all of our students. That's not to say that we too don't have areas where we would like to improve, and over the past many years we've engaged in learning pretty regularly as a team, looking at our data, seeing where there are moments and places where we're proud and moments and places of challenge, and working collectively to identify interventions, implement those interventions, and then reflect upon them. I'd be remiss if saying that one of the areas upon my arrival that we were reflecting on was our over-reliance on suspensions at Boston Prep. Anyone who knows the data, both in the city and at the state level, knows that this was true. And over the past 5 years, we've taken many steps to bring that number significantly down. One of the things that we've done is we worked to make the discipline process and the time out of class much more reflective, and done so in a way that was more private between a student and a teacher, or a student and a dean, so could really work through the why and thinking about how to be reflective and change behavior moving forward. We also underwent and reviewed and adjusted some policies. We've implemented more student leadership and student supports. So our students actually came forward to high school young women to create the Phoenix Friends Mentoring Program, and we have now more than 60 high school, middle school mentoring pairs working to strengthen relationships and outcomes. And we also have a Dean's Council, which was initiated by high school students as well, to support those processing and reflective conversations. In addition, we increased the level of student government, both at the middle school and the high school level over that same time period, and currently both of those bodies are led by students that identify as female. Through that time, we continued to deepen our investment in advisory in the middle school and in the high school, and we've increased the number of student-led discussions on topics related to gender identity and other social justice issues that students have brought forward, and last year implemented a demonstration around community conversations, connecting events to events happening in school. And finally, we invested deeply in our persistence project. These are our counselors working with our students when they leave us and are in college, and talking with them about that transition and supporting them when they're no longer on campus. With these interventions and the work of the team, we have made progress relative to our goals, but we still have work to do. And we believe what we measure matters, and so we have set more aggressive goals around suspensions, around any time outside of class. We're looking into other evidence-based interventions that can support collaborative problem solving or other trauma-informed care at Boston Prep. We're continuing to use PAIR, which is a collaboration with McLean Hospital and Harvard Medical School, and being more trauma-informed in our social groups. We are going to continue to increase our counseling services at school and finding more ways to celebrate and recognize the contributions of our students publicly and in collaboration with their families. Finally, we're looking at our curriculum always and finding ways to make it more culturally responsive and certainly engaging in ongoing professional development with faculty. And so more work to do, progress to be made, and all in an effort to support all of our students.
Thank you. And when you say culturally responsive, does that mean that cultural competency is an ongoing part of professional development? Could you just talk about what that looks like?
Well, some of the topics have come up earlier. So we have done some work led by teachers at Boston Prep. We've done some work led by outside facilitators, experts in this area, talking about white privilege, talking about and exploring what books are included in the curriculum, how might we want that to change, what are the ways that we celebrate and incorporate culture daily versus just at specific moments throughout the school year. And this year, 14 teachers have stepped forward to lead a committee around cultural competency at Boston Prep. And their initial takeaway was that as adults, we need to work on ourselves and with ourselves deeply first to be able to then engage with students. That the adults have to be uncomfortable with being uncomfortable with one another first.
Okay, very good. And I didn't recall, I'm sorry, I was taking copious notes while you were speaking. Do you have a dress code?
We do, yes, a
Is
uniform
it a
policy.
uniform? Okay. And is there a percentage, and I keep bringing this up because it was such a common and reoccurring thread throughout the focus groups with the 100 girls, the disparate impact of what appears to be a neutral dress code policy, but the body shaming aspect of it. So could you speak to, in terms of where there's been an incident that has required discipline, what percentage of that might be from dress code?
Dress code uniform is not at the top of the list in terms of discipline-related issues. Like John referenced, we too have belts and shoes and shirts and things of that nature, so that uniform doesn't preclude anyone from class time.
Okay.
It is something, the gender-specific nature of certain aspects of our dress code policy are something that we are looking at this year to make sure that students, all students feel that the dress code policy and uniform is fair and equitable to them.
And is hair care or styling part of that dress code? Okay, so there's no limitations or anything around that?
No.
Okay, so hijabs and everything?
All welcome.
All right, awesome. Okay, thank you for your testimony. Okay, and now we'll hear from Shauna. Who else is on here? Melody, Nadia, Boston Collegiate Charter School. Okay, hopefully I pronounced everyone's names correctly there. Okay. I want to thank everyone again for your presence this evening, for actively listening, and for your patience throughout. After this Boston Collegiate Charter School panel, we'll be hearing from the Educators for Excellence, and then we'll be opening it up to public testimony. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilor Presley. My name is Shauna Baron, and I'm the Executive Director at Boston Collegiate Charter School. It's nice to see you. I missed you at our graduation in June, but we thank you for having spoken. I was just 2 weeks out from having my second child.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Boston Collegiate is a college preparatory school in Dorchester. We serve 700 students in grades 5 through 12, and our mission is to prepare each student for college. So I'm excited to talk to you about how this important topic connects to our work and our mission. I'm here with 2 of my colleagues, Nadia Leedon and Melody Rodriguez, who'll be sharing a bit about our work with young women of color. It felt really important on this topic to give voice to the people who are working most directly with our students, so I'm excited for them to talk about their work. I did want to say personally, though, that as a Latina, a mom and a Boston resident, I'm so grateful to you for having this hearing. This summer, I was bouncing my baby, and I heard about the young women at Mystic Valley Charter School, and I was appalled, as I'm sure everyone in this room was, and actually as was the State Charter Association. And so as a charter school, it just feels so gross to know that that's going on, and to think that things like that would be going on in my own school. We try very hard to ensure that our practices are affirming and culturally sustaining, though rigorous and in some ways old school, and we're working on that. We do at Boston Collegiate have a uniform policy. That said, we strive to ensure that there's room within this policy for self-expression, for students to wear Boston Collegiate gear on certain days that represents the clubs they're involved in, their passions, and things of that nature. And this notion of self-expression is actually so critically important for us because we're one of Boston's most diverse schools. At Boston Collegiate, we have 50% students of color and 50% students who are white, and they come from all of Boston's neighborhoods. So to make sure that our school is a safe space and that the path to college is an affirming one for all of our students is critically important. I know that part of today's focus is on behavior and discipline systems. At Boston Collegiate, we, like my colleagues at Brooke and at Boston Prep, have been shining a light on our own behavior policy in the spirit of ensuring that we are the school that our students deserve. We've been using an online tool to track behaviors. We've adjusted our consequences to ensure we're taking into account where students are coming from. So I'll give you an example. It used to be the case that, so the way our policy works, students are expected to be on the map, so they need to be mindful, achieving, professional, and persevering. And it's our belief that those behaviors are what lead to college preparation. And so we have a merit and demerit system that aligns with those values. But it used to be the case that you could get a demerit for not being prepared for school by not having a pencil. And you could get 9 demerits. And 9 demerits might actually lead to a suspension. So it could just be the case that because no one was able to buy you pencils, you were not prepared for school, and then you got demerits, and then you got suspended. So we took a very careful look at what was leading to this kind of behavior, and what were some things that were, what we realized were just administrative demerits that resulted in students being excluded for school. And we really asked ourselves the hard questions. And I'm glad that with this kind of thinking, we've dramatically reduced suspensions so that from the 2015-2016 school year, where in our lower school where the body of this work was being done, over 75 suspensions were held in that year. Last year we had less than 10. So we're on a journey, we're working on it. And it is about just really figuring out why are students doing or not doing the things that we are asking of them. I also want to note, though, that it is our core belief that without great teachers, nothing else matters. And so we really think, and I'm here with teachers because we really believe this, that the best way to keep students focused and to ensure that their behavior is appropriate is to teach them really well so they want to pay attention. Because if they don't want to pay attention, they're going to act out and they're going to exhibit behaviors that we don't find appropriate for school. So great teaching really is the key thing that we're focused on. Another thought, just in terms of trauma, because I know that's a focus today, our thought is that the best step there is to have adequate staffing to just make sure that students have people they can go to. So we're pleased that we have 2 full-time counselors, a large number of counseling interns, and a part-time psychologist on staff, all helping us better understand some of the issues we're seeing. And our next step is to make sure that they're not just handling a caseload of students, but sharing their incredible knowledge with our teaching staff. In terms of social and emotional learning, we have been partnering with PAIR, the Program in Education and Resiliency that Sharon mentioned out of McLean Hospital and Harvard Medical School. And the way that works is they come in and they do a holistic student assessment. They help us understand what are our students' social and emotional strengths and growth areas, and then they have designed targeted interventions that we implement at school. And there's one that's actually specific for girls. It's called Strong Links. So it's designed to help girls develop voice and self-advocacy and address issues of confidence. And we know who to put in that group based on the holistic student assessment. So it's a data-driven approach to social and emotional learning specifically for girls. So far, the girls that have been in it have loved it, and we've seen growth in our young women who participated. We have also been working hard to ensure our curriculum incorporates more protagonists and authors of color. And as I observe our classrooms, I do see that value and that focus coming alive. Just last week, I saw a robust student discussion of Sandra Cisneros' House on Mango Street in Nadia's class. And we've also launched a senior elective on race, class, and identity, which is taught by a very passionate educator and was visited last year by Counselor Jackson. Everybody thinks Counselor Jackson and I are not, on the same page, and we may not agree on charter schools, but we agree that students should really understand their racial and cultural identity, and he came and was a very compelling guest speaker for that class. We're not perfect by any stretch. We're working really hard, and we appreciate being held accountable, so thank you for inviting us here to speak about our work. We are on a journey to be our best selves for our students. And I also finally wanted to note that I think this topic, supporting young women of color, can be an area, and I really appreciated your noting this at the beginning, that we can all work on collaboratively in this city. Too often we think of things as a district school issue or a charter school issue, and I think we can all agree, being here in this room together, that from a student's perspective, from a parent's perspective, what matters most is that children go to schools where they can be challenged and respected. I serve on the Boston Compact, and I know that group has been bringing schools together to focus on supporting learning for boys of color for several years. I'm eager to see what comes out of this discussion, and I hope that we can find ways to work together across all school types on things that matter to our children. So thank you for having us. I'm going to turn it over to Nadia.
Thank you, and I can tell you were actively listening as you anticipated every question I had. So we'll now turn it over.
Hi, good evening, everyone, and good evening, Councilor Presley.
Good evening.
My name is Nadia Leeden, and I worked at Boston Collegiate Charter School for over 7 years. I currently work as an 8th grade ELA, or English Language Arts teacher, and advise the school's Multicultural Club, or MCC as we refer to it, for grades 8 through 12. BCCS started out as South Boston Harbor Academy in 1998, only becoming Boston Collegiate Charter School and recruiting a more diverse student body starting in 2004. This legacy was racially charged, as you can imagine, and during my 2nd or 3rd year at BCCS, a group of high school students, most of whom were Black and who I did not work with, presented me with their concerns regarding racist and prejudiced interactions they had with members of their community in and outside the school. Our students could feel the trickling effects of this legacy that I just talked about, and so badly wanted a space to discuss and inform our community of the challenges they faced, and to also celebrate the diversity of our school. Since we launched MCC several years ago, the MCC now hosts a yearly heritage event, will be in our 4th, I believe, this year, fosters school-wide discussions around challenging topics like race, gender, classism, etc., and has fostered young female leadership. The most active members of MCC have been young women of color, who have developed voice, organizational skills, and the overall ability to lead their peers. And to be honest, all I've done to allow this work to happen is to listen to these children, these young people, and to be my truest self when doing so. I let them see me for who I am, my interests, my passions, my struggles, and I do my best to model the ability to take your passions and run with it, to make others care about your own cause. I show my students that I believe in them, and that even though the world may seem so against them, they have the knowledge, power, resources, and voices to overcome those barriers. It is so important that we empower our passionate young people, as they will be the ones to carry on our work. So thank you, Councilor Presley, for calling attention to this important issue.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Melody Rodriguez, and I began my teaching career 5 years ago. At the Epiphany School in Dorchester, I served as a teaching fellow, and for the past 2 years, I've taught at Boston Collegiate as the 8th grade history teacher. As part of our commitment to our students, the teachers are encouraged to provide an after-school elective once a year. The Natural Hair Club was an idea inspired by my own experiences. Being a woman of color and growing up in a suburban neighborhood did not lend to many examples of natural black hair. I did not develop an appreciation for my hair as an extension of my identity until college, where I took part in what they call the big chop, where I literally chopped all my hair off. This began a period of regrowth for me emotionally, as well as for my hair. What I wanted for my students in regards to this new club was a place for female students, particularly female students of color, a place where their identities were welcomed, celebrated, and appreciated. Students are often faced with standardized requirements of beauty, being white, with straight hair, and blue eyes, not leaving much room for students of color to see examples of their beauty, to see that their skin, their hair, and that their bodies are of value. The club focuses on tackling and dismantling the media-promoted standard of beauty and learning about our own. Students discuss the implications of the media on their identities, They research their hair types, they find ways in which to take care of it, and how to style it. All of this feeding back to students' self-worth, confidence, and appreciation of their natural beauty. The club is now carried on to the high school at Boston Collegiate with my first cohort of girls in the 9th grade, and has also found a place at the Epiphany School in Dorchester, led by a teaching fellow who just happens to be my sister. My hopes for the club are to promote positive body image, self-worth, and pride of our intersectionalities. Thank you.
Tell me when y'all meet, I just want to come.
Right?
I just want to participate. Well, thank you all for sharing. And again, your presentation was thorough and answered every question that I would have had. So appreciate your sharing some of your innovative programming and best practices with everyone here. And thank you for being educators.
Thank you.
All right, and now for our final panel of the evening, before public testimony, we'll hear from Educators for Excellence. Okay. Sarah? Oh, okay. Okay. Hi, how are you? Thank you for joining us.
Hi, my name is Chastity. I am an educator in the classroom. I grew up in the area. I'm from Lynn, which is north of Boston. Both my parents graduated from Boston Public Schools. And my grandma lives across the street, has lived here for as long as I can remember. I came to education, and specifically, I came back home after graduation because I realized that there was a lack of representation in this field. And I became an educator because of the women of color who did the work before me, and because I had a mentor that showed me that I didn't have to accept what others had said about me and that I could create my own destiny. And that's what I'm trying to do in the classroom. So in my line of work, in both charter and in district schooling, I have noticed that school culture and discipline unintentionally conflicts with students' home culture and discipline, and particularly to girls of color and their ability to being able to articulate themselves. So what might be deemed as typical interactions at home are seen as unprofessional in the school settings. So at my school in particular, we teach a curriculum and then we stress the world that we live in, where we ask students to be able to advocate for themselves. But when students, and particularly girls of color, do tend to advocate for themselves in response to school culture or discipline or what's going on in the world, they are seen as being rebellious or having an attitude and punished for talking back. Instead of being taught that it's okay to respond to things that they feel are unfair and that they have every right to voice their opinions and that their voice matters. Girls of color need to be provided with tools to being able to articulate themselves in the ways where their voice doesn't get lost in school discipline policy. So I strongly believe that there is a need for some sort of initiative to support students. As one of the few women of color teachers at my school, there is a demand for a sort of mentorship that I feel like I don't have the capacity to do on my own. And so I'm hoping that me speaking here can spark some sort of conversation where we can think about initiatives to really support girls of color.
Excellent. All right. Thank you very much for your testimony. And thank you for being educated. Thank you. And we're hungry, so we're going to go to your grandma's and eat. Okay, thank you very much. All right. Just a couple of housekeeping notes. Please make sure that you sign in. Some of you are skip past the sign-in table, and we do want to make sure that we have your information and your email address so we can keep you apprised of what will be next. Because again, the steps for this were our focus groups over the summer with 100 girls of color who attend Boston schools. Then the girls' listening session, school personnel listening session, and then we will be merging the two, and we'll be presenting formal recommendations, across the board, based on what we've heard here, what we heard over the summer, and what we heard at our hearing in the fall. So we want to make sure that we're able to disseminate this information to you, especially since some of what you spoke about here today might be highlighted as a best practice, okay? So please make sure that you signed in and that we have your email address. And then finally, is there anyone who would like to offer public testimony? We will welcome you now if you would like to add anything to this conversation. Look at people looking nervous. I'm not drafting you, but if you have something to add, this would be the time. Erica, did you want to testify? Okay. I'm sorry, I meant to tell people to check the box up front if you wanted to testify, so I would have that list. Okay. And I also wanted to invite our school resource officers. Please, would you like to come up or say anything? Okay, all right. Okay, all right, thank you very much. All right, and this is Erica Butler.
Good evening. My name is Erica Butler. I work for Boston.
Pull your mic in. Pull your mic.
Is it on?
Pull it close.
Like that?
There you go.
I work for Boston Centers for Youth and Families, and we've been funding a girls' initiative since 2008. So we basically work out of the community centers, and we provide girls with gender-specific opportunities, girls' events. We also host every summer a program called the Girls Leadership Corps. So Ayana knows it's been my passion forever, and I will continue to do this as long as I can. And also, wait, I did want to add too, we do have a couple of other things that we offer.
Erica, do you want to speak to the programming in terms of the ages that you serve, the demographics of the girls that you serve, by and large, racially, culturally, and what your relationship is with schools?
Definitely. So a few of our centers are based in schools. So one of the locations for us, we definitely work out of Dorchester. For many girls of color in that neighborhood, we provide the Girls Leadership Corps there every summer. Do you want me to disclose the community center?
Whatever resource you want people to be aware of.
Definitely. So in the summer, we're at the Perkins Community Center. It's on Talbot Ave, and we partner with the Lee School as well as surrounding agencies. Boston Police is also a strong supporter of the program, being that it's funded through the Shannon Grant. We've also expanded into South Boston now. We have a program there at the Condon. That's also in a Boston public school. And I found that working with the girls and just doing a lot of different focus groups and research, that we scaled it back and we started to target girls between the ages of 12 to 14 for those programs in the summer. We do offer also opportunities for girls 15 and up. A lot of those are training development, getting them ready for college preparatory, things of that nature. A few girls also work under the Girls Initiative throughout the school year. So they go out and they mentor girls and their peers and basically inform them. Like upcoming, we have a few events in this month as well that we have. And so we try during the school year to host something for girls that's educational, safe, and basically about empowerment, making sure that they know that they're being supported and heard. My door is always open, so it's definitely, I'd say like once April hits, my phone is ringing off the hook about, hey, what's going on for the summer? What kind of opportunities do you have, etc. The other thing through BCYF that I was happy to see is we've now expanded the street worker program, so now we have 10 female street workers versus just like a 2. I mean, I've been with BCYF for a while now, and to see that increase has really been very, very substantial for the neighborhoods and the girls. And we work together as well. So if I have a young lady who's maybe in bad times, hard, maybe she's court involved, I can refer her to the street worker program and she gets mentored, vice versa. Also, something that I've worked on in the past, I want to say hard in the past few years now, is making sure that at the community centers that they have gender-specific programming, so girls know that they're supported at their centers, giving the sites opportunities as well to offer a program. It could be anywhere as Girls Lead, the self-defense class, or the Big Sisters, or the Girl Scouts, etc. Just giving them opportunities and access to other resources within the community through the grants as well.
Excellent. Erica, thank you so
Yeah,
much.
question.
Oh, no, that's perfect.
And I just want to say, I appreciate you doing this. I mean, I never get a chance to tell you like in public, I'm always on the low. But Ayana has always been a supporter of the Girls Initiative from day one. And this Saturday, we have an event that she knows I love to death. It's the International Day of the Girl. And I want to say thank you for always supporting that too, because they get so excited to see you.
Oh,
She's a very, very inspiring woman.
Oh, Erica, thank you. No, thank you.
Thank you for letting me talk.
I'll say to you what I said to Aisha earlier. Thank you for laboring in love and always fighting for our girls. You've been a steadfast champion. So we thank you for that. Thank you for being here today. Okay. All right. Is there anyone else who would like to offer public testimony? Okay. And so with that, we are going to bring this hearing to a close. Again, I thank each and every one of you for what you do every day. A big shout out to my dear friend and Chief of Staff, Jessica Tobner, for the role she plays each and every day. But thank you for being responsive to her outreach calls, and we hope that you will allow us to continue to engage you as partners in this work. And with that, we will officially adjourn.